The world is noisy now, not only with noise, but with expectations. Each second, a beep, a text, a voice, all vying for your attention. And in the midst of it all, you lost the quiet. You lost yourself. We wake up to not peace, but stress. We scroll before we catch our breath. We pursue the next thing before the last one even lingers. And in the ceaseless din, we begin to confuse motion for meaning, busyness for purpose, noise for life. But here is the truth people never learn. Stillness isn't weakness. It is power. In stillness, the mind gets sharper. The soul gets heard. These guys are a reminder. A man rediscovers control he believed the world had stolen from him. The Stoics learned this long before smartphones, before algorithms, before chaos governed the human heart. Marcus Aurelius would write in the quiet of dawn, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He ruled an empire, yet he understood, without inner stillness, even a throne feels like a cage. We live in a time when silence feels foreign, even frightening. Because when the noise stops, you're left alone with your thoughts. And that is the fight most won't even consider. They flee from stillness because it reflects, and in the reflection, they see the truth they've buried beneath distraction. But the man who knows how to be still, he masters time. He becomes immovable in a world addicted to movement. He acts when necessary, not when expected. He listens first before he speaks. He waits first before he moves. And in that stillness is his power. Silence is not the lack of life. It is the control of it. It is the pause between thoughts, the gap between breaths, where true power resides. It is the stronghold of the mind against the clatter of 1,000 opinions. When you stand still in a world that can't stop moving, you become uncommon. And what is uncommon becomes strong. Most men don't know it, but they're slaves to noise. Not chains, not rulers, not masters, just noise. They think they're free because they can say what they feel. But in reality, their mind is never quiet long enough to hear itself talk. You see, silence isn't the absence of words. It is the absence of reaction. It is the freedom to witness chaos without ever becoming part of it. And that is what makes the strong from the weak, the wise from the loud. Today, folks scramble to fill each quiet interval. A guy can't sit in a room by himself for 5 minutes before grabbing a screen, because silence does not sit well with him. It reminds him of what he is trying to avoid, his fears, his doubts, his failures. He can't tolerate the sound of his own mind, so he retreats behind music, chatter, and perpetual distraction. That is not living. That is escaping. But the Stoics knew that if you can't command your inner world, the outer one will always command you. Epictetus taught, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And self-mastery starts in silence. It starts the instant you stop reacting and begin observing. The instant you understand that not every fight is worth your energy. Not every insult your response. Stillness is discipline masquerading as peace. It is what makes you able to see beyond deception, to act with purpose, to speak when it counts. A man who is always responding is predictable, but a man who is still, who listens, who waits, is unstoppable. The world will try to get inside your head. It will lure you into noise, outrage, and opinion. But the moment you pause, the moment you breathe instead of respond, you take back control. You remind the world that you are not its servant. You are your own master. When the world is loud, silence is rebellion. It is a quiet act of strength that most will never know, and that is why it works. Power does not originate from noise. It is born in restraint. Consider a lion. It does not roar every day. It remains quiet, patient, and waits for the appropriate moment to attack. That is true strength. Not posturing, not reacting, but watching, storing energy till it counts. A man's stillness is the same. It is not weakness but control in its purest form. Most men get movement and progress mixed up. They believe the louder they are, the more they will be heard. Noise doesn't gain respect, control does. The Stoics understood this. They conditioned themselves to remain calm in the midst of storms, to be quiet during chaos. Because when the mind quiets, clarity emerges. And with clarity comes guidance. Stillness doesn't equal inaction. It equals action on what counts. It is the skill of slowing down the world outside, so your inner world can take the lead. That is why Marcus Aurelius wrote at night. He wasn't writing for the world. He was writing to shut it up. He was exercising power in its simplest form, power over himself. You know, most people are drawn by emotion like leaves on a breeze. One insult, one failure, one rejection, and they break. But the man who is still in himself doesn't stir so readily. He feels emotion swell, recognizes it, then allows it to drift away like a cloud. That is not detachment, that is mastery. Stillness is what enables a man to respond with precision rather than impulse. It is what enables him to speak gently but cut sharply with words. It is what enables him to withstand pain without whining, because his power lies in quietness, not in attention. Amidst chaos, stillness renders you unpredictable, and unpredictability is power. When others can't read your feelings, they can't control your moves. When they can't rile you up, they can't break you. That is the secret. Silence shields, stillness strengthens. And the more you get into it, the more the noise around you starts to recede. Until one day, you realize that peace was never out there. It was always within you, waiting for you to hear. Stillness is not a place you discover once. It is a daily construction. It is a muscle tempered through restraint, presence, and discipline. Each time you feel like reacting and remain silent, it develops. Each time you feel like speaking and shut up, it gets strong. And each time you fight the need to prove yourself, you emerge victorious in an unseen battle. The world instructs you to be loud, to declare each triumph, to justify each opinion, to answer each insult. But a Stoic man understands validation is a trap, because the more you must be noticed, the less you get to decide who you are. You become a puppet of notice, and notice fades. Silence, however, is eternal. It doesn't plead to be heard, it insists on it. A silent man brings mystery, presence, and weight. It is felt by the people before he says anything. They have no idea what he is thinking, and that gives him power already. Seneca used to say, "The greatest blessings come to those who are content with little." Stillness teaches that. When you require less from the people, less noise, less distraction, you become invincible. No one can play games with a man who doesn't crave approval. No one can beat a man who doesn't have to yell. Stillness is your training against chaos. It is what keeps you grounded when everyone else freaks out, centered when everyone else is running around, and peaceful when everyone else is crumbling. Not unemotional, unshaken. It is what distinguishes the reactive from the resilient, mastering stillness. You cease to pursue peace because you embody it. You begin to see how the ones who shout the loudest always have the weakest thoughts, how the noisiest spaces are usually the emptiest, and how true wisdom does not speak to be heard, it speaks to be understood. All great men, Marcus, Epictetus, Aurelius, understood this principle. The boisterous world will always seek to draw you in, but your strength comes from standing back, observing, and determining when to act. Not every battle is worth your strife. Not every comment warrants your reply. Not every sound is worth your notice. Stillness is your armor, and in a world hooked on noise, it is also your act of defiance. In a boisterous world, the biggest man is the one who can sit in silence without disintegrating. Most people are afraid of being alone with their mind, because silence reveals truth. It reveals them to themselves without distraction, without deception, without flight. That is why they pursue noise, scrolling, talking, arguing, anything to not confront themselves. But a Stoic man does the reverse. He sits in silence and listens. He stands face to face with his pain, his fears, his weaknesses, not to annihilate them, but to comprehend them. Because when you look at your demons square in the eye, they lose their ability to dominate you. The war within is not to scream louder. It is to look deeper. When Marcus Aurelius penned his Meditations, he wasn't doing it for glory. He was writing to remind himself to remain unflappable, to remain centered, to remain unruffled. He knew that the mind, untrained, becomes a battlefield, but when it is trained by stillness, it becomes a fortress. Stillness doesn't imply inactivity. It implies mastery. It is the gap between stimulus and response. The wait before you respond, the inhale before you speak, the equanimity before you determine what really counts. In that space is your freedom, because every time you respond impulsively, you lose power. But every time you opt for stillness, you regain it. Imagine a warrior about to go into battle. He doesn't spend energy yelling. He watches, computes, waits for the opportune moment. That is stillness in action. Poised power. When you achieve that, life no longer seems crazy. You no longer battle each wave. You learn to ride it. You halt resisting each test. You begin molding it. And you halt being dictated to by noise. You begin guiding it. Recall, the world pays for loudness, but values composure. Anyone can yell. Few can remain quiet and still triumph. Your tranquil mind is the strongest weapon. It notices what fury can't. It hears what din drowns, and it constructs what devastation wrecks. So when the world yells, whisper. When it hurries, decelerate. When it demands reaction, pause. That pause is your power. When the storms of life rise up and the din of the world is at a deafening pitch, most people break down. Not because they're weak, but because they never practice silence. Silence isn't emptiness. It is restraint. It is wisdom coated with calm. The man who can sit in quietness while the world burns about him, that man cannot be broken. You see, power isn't in force. It is in restraint. It is in being serene when you might rage. It is in keeping your mouth shut when you might destroy. It is in listening when you'd rather be right. That is what makes a Stoic scary. Not his thunder, but his self-control. Seneca once said, "The greatest empire is to be emperor of oneself. And that empire is governed in silence, not anarchy. Because when you can rule your own feelings, the world cannot rule you. When you no longer respond, you dictate the result. When you no longer pursue noise, peace pursues you." The reality is, the world today is afraid of stillness, because it can't package it for you to buy. There is no paywall on silence, no billboard for peace. But the Stoics understood everything you actually require is inside. You don't become powerful by yelling louder. You become powerful by remaining stationary as others become out of control. So pace yourself, breathe. Hear that still, small voice within you, the one that knows better, even when the world yells otherwise. That is the voice of strength. That is the sound of the Stoic heart. And when you know how to live from there, no storm can shake you. You'll walk through adversity unscathed, through adversity unhurried, through adversity unbroken, because the man who has learned stillness has already prevailed.